On KXVS.
Yes, if you and on this video will be a link in the description where you can click it. But if you want to type it in, we made it real easy for you. Bit.ly, the short link, bit.ly. So you can type bit.ly/subscribe_KXVS_YouTube. So bit.ly/subscribe_KXVS_YouTube. That's easy enough, right, Donovan? Donovan is a silent minority.
Speechless.
I'm trying to get my accent right. Hold on. I'm just throwing over it in my head. Let me start. Hold on. Yeah, hold on. How to do it? All right, I don't know about you guys, but I'm going to go subscribe to this new channel. It sounds interesting.
Yeah.
Yo, what's different about this channel than the last one?
Well,
what's changed?
Well, we're making some changes. We're always doing something new, but this is something that we had to do this, and we had to do this for a while. So this new channel, it's really not much different, except the channel will be different. So all our new content is going on the channel, and we're going to migrate all our videos over to that channel as well, and we won't be using the old channel. So if you're waiting on that channel, you'll be missing it. So please do subscribe to our new channel, and it's real easy. Follow us on Facebook, thevoiceofstockton.org. You can find us everywhere. Keep watching us on our live streams, but that's it. We just wanted to break in and tell you that.
And let's make Stockton better together.
That's right. Make Stockton better together. All right. So, you know what? Let's start this track over because this is the best bomb song. And thank you for tuning in. Appreciate you. KXVS, the voice of Stockton, with Donovan and Mr. Details, Dustin Breakwell. This is Governor Don signing off.
And welcome into Stockton Alive with Nate Knodt. Here's your host.
Good evening. This is our first time on the air with this show here at KXVS 92.1 FM. Of course, streaming live on the internet, both visually and audio. Let me talk about what the show is and why we have the name Stockton Alive. I wanted Stockton in the name because this show is about Stockton. That's the entire purpose of this show. And this show will be as much as we can make of it with the residents of Stockton and the leaders and the officials and the activists and whoever we can pull onto the air as time goes along. This is the first show. For this particular first show, you'll pretty much have to listen to me. I don't have a guest tonight, but we're working on that. The name Stockton Alive was chosen for very specific reasons. This show is neither about the past, present, or the future of Stockton. It's going to be about all of those things. It's neither old, nor contemporary, nor new, nor trendy. We're going to make it try to be fresh and new and interesting every week. We'll be doing the show live 2 Mondays a month with a replay on the other Mondays. We'll try to keep the idea, in fact, that we're not always live on the air, and we'll try not to date ourselves with too many facts and figures and events. The name Stockton Alive has an exclamation mark at the end of it. So we'll normally visually, our audio, say Stockton Alive with some energy and exclamation mark. Now, the reason for that is I think Stockton is a great city. I think it has been a great city. I think it's always going to be a great city. And I therefore think it deserves an exclamation mark. And we're going to try and have this show be relatively fast-paced, lively, and we'll try to put some energy and action into it. Now, of course, there's only so much you could do with radio, and I'm not going to be a clown and use a bunch of weird sound effects, and I'm not going to be Howard Stern and do shock talk. So having energy and action fast-paced somehow is going to have to happen with actual real-life statistics, facts, and figures. But anyway, the show is Stockton Alive, exclamation mark. Of course, I'm your host, Nate Knodt. The show's not about me, so I'm not going to say too much, but I do want to give you a brief introduction. I'm from French Camp, California. I always take great delight in that because I don't think there's a lot of people that have hosted a radio show that have been from French Camp, California. For those of you who have been lifelong residents of Stockton don't actually know where or what French Camp is, it's the little settlement about 10 miles south of Stockton, basically located on South El Dorado. As you're driving towards Lathrop, you get interrupted with this funny little community that's kind of in a time warp, and that's French Camp. It has railroad tracks on the north and railroad tracks on the south, a few homes and dusty buildings in between. The interesting thing about French Camp, I'm not the youngest person in the world, especially reviewing live, you can see that. But the community hasn't really changed since I left there. I left there in 1962. So obviously French Camp has been in something of a time warp for at least 55 years. It would be a great place to film a current modern episode of The Twilight Zone about maybe a Back to the Future show. But anyway, so I'm from French Camp. Now, it has one unique spot in Central California history. This show will be about the San Joaquin and Central Valley also, because since Stockton is the heart of that region. French Camp is California's oldest inland settlement, dating back to 1828. I don't think a lot of people know that, even though there's a sign that tells you that on either end of town as you come in or out. And the interesting thing is it's called French Camp. It's named after French fur trappers who were sent by the British East Indies Company from the Hudson Bay. Now, that's a relatively meandering way to get your name. The British send French people in, and they come by way of Hudson Bay, which is way north of Canada, in a frozen tundra area, and they march all the way down to the hot, muggy, sweaty, swampy Central Valley of California, which at that time, essentially, this area was basically a swamp back then. Basically a swamp-infested area with a bunch of bushes and trees and running water everywhere and a lot of mosquitoes. But there was a lot of wonderful wildlife, and they trapped furs here. Furs were extraordinarily important in that era because you didn't have any synthetic clothing. You didn't even have Levi's at that point. So fur and skins were one of the primary commodities that exist in the world. So French Camp was a significant place in its original establishment by the French fur trappers. So there's a little bit of history. I'm full of all kinds of useless information, by the way. It just spews out all the time. So I moved from French Camp to the much bigger city of Manteca, which then was about 8,000 people. That's in 62. And back then, by the way, French Camp was about 85% Portuguese Catholic. It's now more of a Bay Area suburban community, but it was a pretty small little provincial town back then. And then I went to Chico State. Yes, I did get an education. I wasn't a great student, but I didn't burn myself out on the party scene either. I certainly enjoyed Chico, but I did actually get an education there. I was actually there for broadcasting. And the interesting thing is the last time I broadcast a regularly scheduled show was in Chico, would have been 1980. This is my first scheduled live show in 37 years. I'm still kind of amazed. It's actually the first show I've ever had that's really been mine. I used to be kind of a fill-in DJ. I was mainly a sports broadcaster. I used to be the radio play-by-play voice of Chico State sports from about 1977 to 1980. They still had football back then, as did University of Pacific here in Stockton. And then after that, I moved to San Francisco, at which point I moved there to actually work in the transportation business. Ironically, I burned out on broadcasting before I graduated from Chico State. I had spent the last 3 years as a full-time college student helping produce the 11 o'clock news at KXVS TV in Chico, then a CBS affiliate, and working the broadcasts at night, going to college by day, and really not much sleeping much in between. Kind of burned me out on before I ever really had any kind of professional career. So I actually was in the bus business for a while. Then my company then folded up. I'll talk about that in a whole other transportation show another day. And I wound up becoming a teacher, and I wound up back in Stockton and teaching. And amazingly enough, through a weird series of coincidences, I wound up at Edison High School here in South Stockton, out on what was then Charter Way, now Martin Luther King Way. And amazingly, as a long-term sub, I stumbled into a broadcast program. So while I haven't broadcast my own show live since 1980, 37 years ago, I did teach broadcasting at Edison High School for almost 10 years. One of my illustrious students is actually right here at KXVS, Orlando Jose. So anyway, then the other place I've also lived are Hollywood, Sacramento, and I did little temporary stints in Flagstaff, Arizona, and Reno, Nevada. So that's pretty much where I've been. I'm pretty much a West Coast person. I'll take California any day over anywhere. They can make all the fun they want of California. I've been over most of the United States. And while I haven't lived too many of the places, I can tell you it's by far the finest place I've ever been to spend any real time. Nevada's okay if you don't mind being around a lot of gambling. I have the ability to buy a way to walk through a casino, and the machines and the slots and the cards, none of that excites me at all. I could just walk right through there and not have it bother me the least bit. Plus, they took all the fun out of gambling anyway. The slot machines, most of them don't have handles anymore, and the money doesn't drop out of them anymore. They just give you a credit on a credit card. They took all the fun out of it. Who could forget we used to drive through Nevada on Highway 80, and you'd see little road signs every 2 miles for the Two Stiff Selling Gas Motel in Winnemucca, Nevada. And you'd eventually get there. And when you got there, the one big casino in Winnemucca had a huge grizzly bear towering over you as you came in the front door. And then when you went to the slot machines, they had Indian faces and bandit arms and all kinds of stuff. Now that's gambling. But the stuff they do today is all corporate credit card stuff, no good. But of course, we don't gamble at KXVS. We're the real thing here. Nothing but the facts. Okay, so what we're going to talk about primarily with this first show today, we have the first two shows somewhat planned here. The first show today is I'm going to talk about my memories of Stockton as a little kid. This was my first big city. It was a great city. It was a big city. It was a great metropolitan city. And I'm going to give you all the reasons why it was all those things as we go through this show. For some reason, the current residents who live here don't appreciate all the great things we have in Stockton. And part of that is because it was, in some ways, more esteemed years ago in the time that I'm talking about. And as I go through that, you'll kind of see what I mean. And then the next show, which would be taped 2 weeks from today and broadcast live and taped 2 weeks from today, I'll talk about a lot of the current stuff that's going on that's making us great again. And not that we've ever not been great, but getting more vibrant downtown would be a better way of putting it, the comeback of downtown Stockton. So we'll go into that, and then by the third show, we'll probably be talking about, which would be approximately a month from now, we'll be talking about a mixture of policies and initiatives, and probably have guest speakers and be talking to movers and shakers and things like that. So let me give you a little bit of my Stockton, to kind of quote the term used by Michael Fitzgerald, the columnist of the Stockton Record, who has a column that I enjoy. I think it's once a week. I think it's Monday or Tuesday morning, called Fitz's Stockton. Well, this is my Stockton, Nate Knodt Stockton. Nate, by the way, is a nickname. I'll reveal all about my name another day. I don't want to talk too much about myself today because I don't want to seem like that's what the show is. God knows I could probably talk about myself and go on and on just like most anyone can. We all have our egos at times. But anyway, my first memory of Stockton was I was probably 2.5, 3 years old. And it's the first memory I have was somebody, was a Salvation Army woman ringing her little bell over her red bucket at Christmas time. This was probably Christmas 1960. And she was standing on the corner of San Joaquin and Main Street. And she was standing in front of the historic Bank of Stockton, which has that beautiful curved facade on the Bank of Stockton building, which is Stockton's first skyscraper, by the way. 1908 was when that skyscraper was built. The skyscraper is still there, although the building now is mostly unoccupied, but it's in good condition. But it was the original and only Bank of Stockton, Stockton branch of the Bank of Stockton, up through 1963. It wasn't until 1964 that they moved their main Stockton banking activities and their headquarters over to the bank that you now see on Minor Avenue and San Joaquin. So that bank looks like a bank. What I mean by that is if you think of a bank, you think of marble floors and columns and gilded cages and beautiful wrought iron and usually some gold or brass or silver wrought iron and woodworks. And that building has all that. It's a shame right now that it's empty. I personally think that lobby would make a terrific nightclub, but I don't have the money to make that happen myself. And there are a couple old banks in downtown Sacramento that they're taking the bank lobbies and turning them into nightclubs and upscale restaurants. So maybe somebody out there have the vision to turn the old Bank of Stockton building into a beautiful nightclub or restaurant. In any event, though, my first memory is the Bank of Stockton with the Salvation Army woman ringing her bell. Of course, I asked my mom what she was doing, and that was the first time I learned about charity and giving and sharing wealth and helping people and unfortunate people, all those great things. All that education came from downtown Stockton at San Joaquin and Main Street. Now, if you go there, the building's still there. The other thing about that building, besides a beautiful curvature facade, is that there's a huge neon sign and huge letters. It's an upright sign or vertical sign. And it says Bank of Stockton in huge letters. And then there's a cool clock, old-fashioned analog clock with big arms that used to be outlined in green neon, and there was white stripes behind it. Great contrasting clock, which right up until they closed that branch, which was in, I think it was January 2011 or December 2010, right up until the time they closed that branch, that clock was maintained and the time was good and they kept it going. Sadly, now the sign, I think the sign still lights up sometimes, but I don't think the clock is accurate anymore or even running. So that's where I got my first start with Stockton's, right there. Now, like most people over the age of 40, which I most definitely am by a couple of decades, my other big memory as far as a building goes would be the Medico-Dental building, which I like to call the mini Empire State Building of Stockton. It's got this beautiful, I want to say Romanesque something. I love architecture, but I'm not an expert about it. But I believe it's a Romanesque something, brick terracotta style building. Until recently, it was the tallest building in Stockton. Now the new courthouse that has yet to open is taller by a couple floors and by maybe 20 or 30 feet. But the Medical Delta building for many years was the tallest building between Sacramento and Fresno. Now, it was only superseded by the big hotel in Modesto, which originally was a Red Lion Inn. I think it's a DoubleTree now. And it had 13 floors, either 12 or 13 floors. I, as a little baby, went up to a doctor on the 12th floor. I also had a dentist in that building somewhere. That is Stockton's number one address was the Medical Dental building, which is located on Sutter Street, block and a half north of Weber Avenue. But what also set that building apart, besides the beautiful architecture, was up on top of that was a huge neon sign. And by the way, one thing cities used to have, and Stockton had its fair share, in fact, it had more than most, was they used to have huge, beautiful, colorful, dramatic, explosive, dynamic neon signs that were on the tops of buildings that you could see these things for miles. But the one on top of the Medical Dental building was the most imaginative one I've ever seen in my life. I'm sure there's better ones. I'm not counting Las Vegas now with all the gambling stuff. But as far as a regular everyday city goes, there used to be this huge sign on top of this thing. And it had this huge swirl of white neon tubes that were about 60 feet in diameter. And in the middle of the white circle of neon tubes were these huge letters. I believe the letters are 12 feet tall. Imagine letters 12 feet tall. That's twice as tall as I am. And that's taller than a story of a building. And the letters said KJAX 99.3. And then underneath that it said Cloud 99. So the white neon tubes were a cloud. And in the middle of this cloud was the huge letters KJAX 99.3, and then the little letters below that was Cloud 99. And it was a very appropriate thing because it was beautiful music. That was the format of the station. One of the other big signs we had downtown, there were several of them, but the one that I can remember, and I'm going to have to look up some of the other ones for another show, but on top of what is now known as the Court Tower, which is a nice skyscraper at the corner of Sutter and Main Street, which was basically Stockton's third skyscraper, which I believe dated to 1911, I think it is, or 1912. Originally it was called the Commercial Bank. Later evolved into the Bank of America. Well, there's a huge sign, also with red letters in white outline, that said Bank of America. And it used to be in kind of a Roman font, not the plain letters that Bank of America uses today. It used to have very distinguished. For any of you, of course, don't know the story, Bank of America started as a Bank of Italy in San Francisco, when a wonderful San Franciscan of Italian heritage started his own bank just to loan money to people just to help them recover from the earthquake of 1906. I can't think of the gentleman's name right now. And right up until 1963 or 64, he used to sit at a desk in the middle of the main branch of Bank of America in downtown San Francisco, and anybody could approach him and talk to him. Imagine that today in this world where people get $20, $30 million golden parachutes to go away because they run companies into bankruptcy and lay off thousands of workers. This guy used to run the Bank of America, which at one time was the largest bank in the world, by the way. And he used to sit at his own desk in the middle of the lobby and anybody could talk to him. Just imagine that. So that's just a couple of the incredible buildings I remember in downtown Stockton when I was a kid. Now, to continue on with that, the medical dental building was also very cool. And that was my first elevator ride. And I hate to admit this again, I'm old enough that elevators had operators back then. It was very cool. They had this big semicircular lever. They used to go around with it to go up and then turn it around back to the left. And that would just stop it up or run it down. In the middle was neutral or stop. And they had to time the stop so the thing stopped at the right floor. You're probably wondering, well, how did they know where to stop? The interesting thing was elevators in those days had an open cage-like door. The hallway door was separate from the elevator, and which they still are actually now. But anyway, the elevator had a cage in it. And as the elevator would progress up or down, the doors that were attached to the hallway had huge numbers on them, like 1 or 2 or 3, representing the floor you're on. And it actually took some skill to drive an elevator. The first time I actually saw a push-button elevator was Chicago, Illinois in 1963. Another great thing about those old buildings, and you still see this, but they're not used anymore, which is also sad. I don't know why they're not used, because it seems very efficient to me. Go into an older building like the Court Tower or the Medical Dental Building, and in some cases, near the elevator, you might see a beautiful kind of metal railing that goes up and down, almost like a window slot. Well, that used to be a U.S. Postal thing. You could just walk down the hallway, put your envelope in there, and shoot right down the slot, right down to the bottom floor, where there was a collection, and then the U.S. Postal Service would just pick it up on the bottom floor of the building. Those were active until the 90s or around 2000. I still don't really understand why they quit using them. It seems like that's very efficient, unless there was a problem with security or break-ins. I don't know. But those are very decorated, very cool, and gave everything this really snazzy look when you saw that. It was real classy looking. So that's a couple of the buildings I remember downtown Stockton as being significant. A typical day for us to go downtown Stockton as a kid, by the way. By the way, when I first was a really tiny little kid, and I don't exactly have memory of this, but when I was a little tiny kid, the way we traveled to Stockton was on Greyhound bus. We used to go to a flag stop in French Camp. Now, the younger generation has no idea what I'm talking about. You used to be able to flag down. Buses like Greyhound buses used to go through very small towns on one street somewhere. And if you stood in an appropriate place, there sometimes was a little road sign that said Greyhound bus stop, sometimes not. But you could wave at the bus and it would stop and pick you up, and you paid the driver the fare. I've been told that from 1957 to 1961, that when I traveled to downtown Stockton, it was by Greyhound bus for the flag stop in French Camp. I believe the flag stop was at Peter's Market, which is still there, by the way. I'm baby of the month, by the way, Peter's Market, back some month in January of 1958. I was born in 57. And the ground station back then was what is now known as the Ganchai Restaurant, by the way. If you look at that building carefully, you'll see it's got an Art Deco design, kind of streamlined look to it. It was once a very, very, very busy station, and it's a sister station to what used to be huge active Greyhound stations in Sacramento, Bakersfield, Fresno, and Vallejo, to name a couple that had similar designs. It was kind of a typical Greyhound station of that era. Greyhound moved to the current location back in 1972. I remember when that Greyhound station opened. They used to have about 80 schedules a day through Stockton. Now they have 16, so you can see the drop-off. But even more so, most schedules, or many schedules, had what they call multiple sections. there was more than one bus running on the exact same schedule, meaning you could take 85 schedules and multiply it times 2 or 3. What you actually had was well over 150 arrivals and departures, meaning buses were coming and going pretty much around the clock all the time. They used to change drivers here, and they used to even pull buses out and service and fuel them sometimes in Stockton. Now the station is pretty much a ghost town. It's only open, this still boggles my mind, it's only open 8 hours a day. It's open for 4 hours a day twice. And that's it. It's closed the rest of the time. There's been plans to turn it into some kind of little mini shopping center. I haven't had a chance to pursue how that's doing. But that's how we used to come to Stockton. And now I eat occasionally at the Ganchai restaurant, although they've been closed of late. Now, downtown Stockton, like most great cities, was once known for its shopping. And I'll rattle off some of the stores that I can remember going shopping at. Carl's Shoes, Levinson's, The Wonder, Rosenthal's, J.C. Penney, Thrifty's, Cress, Newberry's, Mode O'Day, Weinstock's, and Tabucci's. Tabucci's has recently been on Facebook a lot. One of the sons of the owner of Tabucci's, or founders of Tabucci's, has been sending out Facebook messages about his store. I, in fact, it was the last of the traditional stores to remain open in downtown Stockton. I was one of the last customers to purchase something there. I want to say it was about 2004 or something like that, or 2003 maybe. I bought a rain hat there the last week they were open. The other store I have vivid memories of shopping at was Rosenthal's. I remember because we used to go in a back door, and the kids' clothing section was in the back of the store with this kind of unusual colored checkered little floor that looked like a Good and Plenty box. Now, many of you probably don't know what Good and Plenty is, but it's a box of candy that's still out there, has these flecky multiple colors to it. But then, of course, when you had those great department stores, you had incredible lunch counters. And this is probably the classic thing of coming to downtown Stockton. Lodi had this right up until the last Walgreens. Oh, Walgreens is a store I left out, by the way. Walgreens actually had a store open in downtown Lodi until something like 1997 or 1998. Most of these great department stores, or five and dime stores as they were sometimes called, had great lunch counters. And usually the lunch counters were high off the ground with high stools. Now, that was a big thrill for a kid. Your mom or dad would pick you up and put you on this stool, and then you were as tall as your parents, sort of anyway. You had to be careful not to fall off, of course, because it was a long ways down. So you had to kind of hold on for dear life, but you were on this big, huge stool off the ground, and you felt like a big grown-up. And then the waitress would serve you and bring you food on a plate. Of course, you had the great food of that era, what I now call American cuisine, which is becoming something of a rarity in California, which is okay. We have our great diversity, and we get all these other great foods. It's wonderful, but I do kind of miss this, what I call American cuisine. When I say American cuisine, I'm talking about things like hot, open-faced, steaming hot turkey sandwiches with gravy, cranberry sauce, and French fries maybe, or baked potato, and usually a vegetable, or like carrots, or peas, or green beans, or something on the side. And to smell it was always served piping hot, fresh, with steam coming off the top, on a big, heavy, thick china plate, usually with really big, heavy-duty silverware. And sometimes in some of these places, now I was not getting coffee at age 5 and 6, but if your parents were getting coffee, sometimes they brought you a little mini silver coffee pot. They would just set it down next to you, and you could just pour your own coffee the first couple times. And of course, back in that era, frosty ice cream had not, what we now know as self-serve or machine ice cream or frosty type ice cream, had not yet been invented, believe it or not. Ice cream was ice cream in those days. And if you got a milkshake or ice cream, you were scooping it up and they were mixing it in the machine. And usually you got the leftover milkshake in the tin can. Now, this has come back and come full circle, and now a lot of places do that because it's trendy now. The only trouble is now it costs you, an arm and a leg to get a milkshake like that. Then it was just their everyday cost because that's what an everyday milkshake was. But that's the kind of food you got. And these lunch counters had a terrific aroma of meat and gravy and fresh brewed coffee and toast. It's very hard to explain now, and baked potato. No fast food place has that aroma, by the way. They just don't. And by the way, I'm drinking coffee here from our neighboring business right down the street because I'd like to support local independent businesses. So I've got my coffee from the Impresso coffee shop here. I have a little bit of a scratchy throat, but the coffee's keeping me going. Wonderful coffee. So hopefully that paints a picture of some of the really great things in Stockton. Now, to give you again, I didn't quite finish it. A typical day, we'd come in on the Greyhound bus, get off, and generally we'd come in. Often, if we were coming to Stockton, we were coming because we were going to shop for clothes. We sometimes would get a haircut. Amazingly enough, the college is still there on Weber Avenue, right in the middle of Weber Avenue, in the 400 block of Weber Avenue. We used to go to what was, I think, called the Moeller Barber College then. I don't know if it was called that then. In recent years, it was the Moeller Barber College. It used to be a big national chain of colleges, Moehler. Recently, this one here changed its name in about 2008 or 9 to the Stockton Barber College. It's now just a little independent college. It's still there. You can still get a haircut now for like $3.50, $4. Students are doing your hair as kind of student training on the job, but the few times I've gone there, I've gotten a pretty good haircut, and it's affordable haircuts, and that's why we went there. When I was a kid, we really didn't have much money. I think a haircut then for a kid at the college was like 25 cents or something. Then, of course, we would go to the Central Bank, right about where the county about the middle of the county administration building is today, the one with the green iceberg on it. Which I make fun of, but I like that building generally, and I'm glad that building is there. But anyway, there was a bank there we would go. So we'd go banking, we'd go shop, and then we'd go shopping, Rosenthal's, Tabucci's somewhere, Crest somewhere, and then we would usually have lunch at one of the lunch places. The lunch counters that I can recall, sort of, would be Newberry's, Thrifty's, and the one that people rave about the most was Newberry's. I'm sorry, Crest's. Newberry's had one also, but Crest had one downstairs, and that's probably the one that I remember with the big high stools. I'm pretty sure Thrifty had high stools too. The other thing I remember about those buildings too, now it's come full circle and everybody has them, but they had the Casablanca type ceiling fans back then. That was pre-air conditioning. I actually predate air conditioning as an everyday thing, and those fans were really cool and they're very impressive to a little kid. They were used to circulate the air and keep the air fresh, and also to keep flies from coming in the front door or to circulate around. And you'd often have them in the restaurant areas too. So that gives you an idea what downtown was like. Now, we used to go shopping at Safeway on what was then Charter Way. That would now be the Dollar General store over there by Interstate 5. The most significant thing about going there, many years ago, my dad had once been a clerk at a Safeway in Hayward. But that was the first time I saw a moving carousel where the groceries, they push a button, the groceries start moving, which most of them don't do anymore because now you bag your own groceries and you shove them down yourself. But then it was a big deal to see this automatic carousel. That was pretty cool as a little kid. We also shopped at the S&G Market, which I don't know what it was called then. That's what it was called recently. It's got a new name now. It's out on South El Dorado. But there was the first time I saw a coin-operated kid car. And these don't really exist anymore. I don't know how many people remember what I'm talking about. But most grocery stores had 2 or 3 little tiny, fun, goofy little rides at the front. Back then, you put a nickel or dime in. Now it would be, if they still have it now, it's 50 cents, 75 cents, or a buck. You probably swipe a card now. But then I think it was a little fire truck, and the car would bounce around. You could grab the steering wheel and all that. But those are all the things that made Stockton a big city to me, and a great city. Now let me tell you why Stockton really was a great city in those days. And again, we're going to talk about the fact it still is too. In addition to the skyscrapers and the Salvation Army women and the elevator operators and the banks and the lunch counters, Stockton had a lot of things going on in the 60s and the 50s that were a big deal. First and foremost, and this always blows people away when I tell them about it because people just don't imagine that this existed, but we had a network television show based on Stockton. Now, I'm aging myself when I talk about this, and many of you aren't going to know these shows. I realize that. And people don't watch network television now the way they once did. When I was a kid, we only had 3 stations and an independent. You had ABC, NBC, and CBS. And if you're lucky, you might have one independent station, which here in that era was Channel 40, by the way, out of Sacramento, which then was known as a UHF station. The main broadcast stations were what was known as VHS stations. And I'm not going to describe to you what the difference is. It's not relevant, but different antennas. But there was a show that's legendary to this day, and most people have heard of it, called Bonanza on NBC. That's the one with Joe Cartwright. I mean, that's the one with Ben Cartwright and his sons Hoss and Joe, and in the earlier days, Adam. And they had the Ponderosa Ranch. And if you see the show, that's where they show a map of Nevada, and a flyer, flaming thing starts out of South Lake Tahoe. And anyway, that show was notable for being in color. Bonanza was in color from its first episode. I believe it started in 1958. Color TV didn't really become mainstream until 1966. In 1965, about 80% of your shows were black and white. In 1966, about 90% of them were in color. They essentially switched over in 1 year. Kind of like we went from the old form of analog television broadcasting format to the all-digital something or other format that we finally did all at once cold turkey. Well, they delayed it for 1 year, and then they finally did a cold turkey. I forgot what year it was. 2004 or 5 or something, we went digital in the United States, and that made the digital and the big screen TVs really possible. So they did high definition stereo broadcasting. So this was the type of conversion we're talking about back then. Only color TV to black and white then was probably much more dramatic than high definition to regular definition was later today. But anyway, Bonanza was always in color. It was one of the few shows in color. A lot of people never saw it in color because most people have black and white TV sets. We, in fact, got our first color TV set in August of 1965, and I know why we got it, because my grandfather was going to drive from Hayward to Manteca, where I lived, because Channel 3 was not blacked out for a home game of the San Francisco Giants. They were going up for a big Saturday afternoon game in early August 1965, and Juan Marichal was going to face Sandy Koufax on NBC national television. By God, we bought a color television set in time to be delivered to our house to be there for that Saturday game, so my grandfather could drive from Hayward to Manteca to watch that pennant race game between the Giants and Dodgers. But anyway, getting back to why I mentioned color TV and all that. Network television, it's still true with television, but especially when we only had 3 networks. If somebody had a successful show of some kind, somebody would always copy it. Well, Bonanza was this big fancy colored Western with all these heroic episodes, and Ben and people would always save mankind somehow or make some great moral statement and shoot up the bad guys and all that. So ABC, which was a really poorly rated, very long shot third place network in those days, they used to ship money by courier from the Los Angeles affiliate to New York to make payroll every week in those days. That's how poor ABC was as a network. What put them on the map was the 1968 Summer Olympics with boxing and Howard Cosell and Muhammad Ali, and then Monday Night Football in 1970 really got ABC off the ground. But anyway, so ABC invested to do a color Western television show called The Big Valley. And it was based in Stockton, California. So here, Bonanza is like the #1 rated show in America. So ABC competes with it by using Stockton, California Western story. NBC's Bonanza was a patriarch show with a man in charge. Well, ABC used Barbara Stanwyck, once a bad, evil film noir woman of the 30s and 40s, a daring woman. She became the matriarch of the family. Now I forgot the last name they called themselves. The Barclays, thank you. And then they had one adopted son, they had one illegitimate son who was adopted. They had this gorgeous young daughter named Audrey, who was, real life name was Linda Evans, who was all of about 19 years old when this show debuted. Absolutely stunningly drop dead gorgeous. Some people remember her about 20 years later in a show called Dynasty, which was put on the air to compete against a show called Dallas. And that's what most people know Linda Evans from when she's in her late 30s, early 40s. But she was 19 years old on the Big Valley. Then they had an actor named Peter Breck, who was kind of a ladies' man in that era. And then they had a very young Lee Majors. Well, Lee Majors later became the $6 Million Man. Some of you are familiar, even if you don't know the show or don't know much about it, you know who the $6 Million Man was, the Bionic Man, who in real life was married to Farrah Fawcett, by the way, who later became a Charlie's Angel. And that was the show that made ABC a top-rated network, by the way. So imagine that. Stockton is used as a storyline. I mean, the whole script was based around Stockton. The episodes were based in Stockton. Every episode, they'd mention Stockton 20, 30, 40 times. Are we going to go into Stockton? Are we going to eat at the Stockton Inn? Are we going to do this in Stockton? Are you going to come off the train from Stockton from San Francisco? Every episode was like that. And as a little kid, I think, wow, that's great. My city's big-time city. We're on television there. Imagine Stockton competing against South Lake Tahoe on network television in color. Oops, I think I knocked the TV camera loose there. Okay, so imagine that. That's just amazing to me. That Stockton is used as a tool by a network television show to compete against the #1 show in America. Now, also, I should point out Gunsmoke was on the air with CBS at that time. So there's something. Now, to breeze through some other things, we also, just to give you some other things that make Stockton a great city, and especially when I was a kid, well, we have an inland port. You can count on your two hands about how many cities have a major inland port in the whole world, by the way. We got one of them, and ours is successful. It's self-sustaining. A ship, they average about a ship arrival or departure about every day or every other day, and these are big ocean ships, mind you. I'll talk about the silly thing that Bill O'Reilly said about Stockton and water another day. I'm going to try and not make this show too political, but since it relates to Stockton's inland port, I'll talk about that in another episode. But anyway, so we have ocean ships that come here. There aren't many inland cities that can do that. There's Portland, there's Houston, there's a few others in the United States, but there's, like I said, there's about 10 in the whole world that amount to anything. And by the way, we have more tonnage than San Diego as far as freight tonnage. Most people don't know that. Then you've got Pacific basketball, men's basketball, and Pacific women's volleyball. Now, there's other great sports in Stockton, and Delta College had its moments too, and I'll try to bring that into another show. But let me talk about Pacific men's basketball for a moment. As a little kid, I'm growing up listening, and my radio was a much bigger deal back then, sadly, than it is today, especially for sports. Before cable and streaming and everything else, people got most of their sports through radio, and I'm a former radio play-by-play person, so that's still near and dear to me. But I used to listen to the Pacific Tigers on KJOY Stockton. By the way, KJOY and KJAX were sister cities, AM, FM, and they flip-flopped their call letters a number of different times, back and forth between AM and FM. Back then, it was KJOY 1280 AM. And a guy named Pete Gross was the Pacific announcer. Well, he later became a major league announcer in Seattle and had a 25-year career in Seattle as one of the leading broadcasters in America. But he started with the Pacific Tigers in Stockton. Now, in those days, they played in the Civic Memorial Auditorium downtown by City Hall. If you ever go inside that building, it's just a terrific building. It's got beautiful curves and great architecture and ovals and archways. But the beautiful thing is it's primarily made of one big, huge, curving three-quarter balcony with a stage at one end. Officially, that building seats 2,901, but Pacific for basketball used to cram in about 3,400 people. On the ground floor, which is a hardwood floor, nothing else, they had risers with folding metal chairs. Then you had the sweeping balcony come around, which overhung the court, by the way. I'm going to talk about that in a moment. Then you had a stage at one end. Well, they used to put risers and bleachers on the stage. And the Pacific Pep Band was crammed in a corner between the stage and the metal risers of one of the sidelines. And then a huge circular scoreboard clock came out of the ceiling. Well, Pacific had some big-time success in the 60s under a dynamic coach named Dick Edwards. Dick Edwards, by the way, was 169 and 72 as Pacific coach. That's a 701 winning percentage over 9 years. When he took over Pacific, they were a doormat, and they played in a gymnasium at UOP. Then they moved to the Civic Auditorium. They had, I think, 6 or 7 years of sellouts at about 3,400 a game. Extraordinarily noisy building. 3,400 at Civic Memorial Auditorium sounded like 15 or 16,000 in a big arena today, or like the Oakland Coliseum with the Warriors. Anyway, Pacific's record under Dick Edwards in the Civic Auditorium, get this, 192 wins and 34 losses. That's just astounding. That's an 850 winning percentage. They won 45 games in a row there over about a 3-year stretch. They made the NCAA playoffs 4 times under Dick Edwards in 9 years. Now, that's when the NCAA tournament only took 32 teams. Now they take 64. They won the West Coast Conference, or what was then the WCAC at that time, 4 times, and they made the NCAA tournament. Now, most notably, in 1966-67, when they made the tournament the first time, in the first round, they played at a school called Texas El Paso, and they beat them 72-63. Well, that was your defending NCAA champs from the year before. And yes, for you historians out there, aficionados, that was the Texas Western team that started and played an all-black lineup and beat University of Kentucky with Adolph Rupp in a historic game for which they made the movie, I think The Road to Glory or something like that. Well, Pacific beat them as the defending champs the next year in the NCAA tournament. Pacific lost to the eventual champion UCLA with Lou Alcindor, later known as Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. And the big player at that time was Keith Swaggerty, who averaged, and I still can't even get over this, he averaged like 18 rebounds a game and 26 points. Big 6'6" white guy power forward. They also had Bill Stricker, and then later on, in another era when they made the tournament, they had John Gianelli and Jim McCargo and our very own Bob Thomason. I saw Bob Thomason play as a point guard long before he became the longtime winningest coach at Pacific, and I think he has like the third or fourth best or most wins of any West Coast. When I say West Coast, I don't mean the conference. I mean the West Coast of the United States. He wound up with about 300 victories. I don't have his actual number with me today. Then later on in the more recent era, we had some NCAA teams with Mike, and we had the number one draft in the NBA one year, Michael Olowokandi, the Candyman, who came to Pacific from England of all crazy places as a 6'10" African American. And I saw some great games, which we'll go into another time.
Nate, I have those numbers for you. For Bob Thomason.
Oh, okay.
Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah.
437, 321 overall as a head coach in NCAA basketball.
Wow, that's just incredible. 437 wins. He coached for, was it 26 or 27 years?
Yeah, Cal State, Stanislaus, and Pacific, and before that, Columbia College.
Right. And he was in a high school, I think, Central Catholic, somewhere in Modesto,
Yeah.
I think. But yeah, just an amazing career as a coach.
Back in, Nate, just wanted to give you some.
Oh, no, I appreciate that. Jump in any time. How much time do we have left, by the way?
2 minutes.
2 minutes.
2 minutes.
I was worried about filling the show. Well, let's mention real briefly, and I'll do more on them another time. Let's mention that we had 2 NCAA Women's National Championships, 1985 and 1986. Your Pacific Tigers women won the Women's National College NCAA National Championship. And at the first year, I think that tournament was even hosted in Stockton at the A.G. Spanos Center. And those were on CBS National Television. I remember watching those. Sorry, I can't remember the names of a couple of players. Elaine Oden is one of them. I'll probably do an all sports show one time. Also in that era, the Stockton Ports playing at Billy Hebert Field were Class A minor league ball club for the Baltimore Orioles. Well, they fed all the great talent to the Baltimore Orioles teams that won the American League pennant in 1969, 70, and 71 with Brooks Robinson and Boog Powell and all those people. Well, a lot of those guys were Stockton Ports on those teams. And they won the 1970 World Championship over the Cincinnati Red Machine in a stunning 4-1 win. Where a guy named Brooks Robinson made unbelievable, dramatic, spectacular, sensational plays at third base, like 2 or 3 times every single game, all 5 games, and also was the leading hitter of the World Series. Now, to mention real briefly the stadiums, we had Billy Hebert Field. It was a mini Candlestick Park. If you sat there, you had the wind blowing in, gale force winds blowing on you, and the sun in your eyes, and you could roast in the first 3 innings. Then you could freeze to death the last 6 innings. Now, our Banner Island Ballpark, which is unfortunately called Stockton Ballpark generally, because Banner Island Ballpark has a catchy name and great history behind it, that is kind of like a mini AT&T Park, where it's been turned around the face so the wind goes around it, has beautiful panoramic views, and a splash hit is theoretically possible, although I don't think anyone's actually had one since it opened in April of 2005. So, I hope you enjoyed my version of Stockton. Believe it or not, I left some things out of here I could have talked about. I was worried about filling the show, but I think we got through it. And another day, I'll talk about Tommy Lee's Islander, and I'll talk about the great agriculture that we developed in Stockton. We've led the nation in agriculture in this area, really, for the entire history of the Central Valley as an agricultural area, both with our tractors and our machinery and our irrigation, levees, all of that. We're the leading technology for all that. So I hope you like the show. And I think we're probably ready to head on out to our next show. Remember, this is KXVS, the voice of Stockton, and you've been listening to Stockton Alive! With Nate Knodt.